How you doing there? Welcome back to Babble on Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Yud Aleph, Daf 11 of Masechta Chullin. Friends, okay, Daf Yud Aleph has one goal. And the goal of Daf Yud Aleph is to learn how we know that we could rely upon a probable probable majority. How do we know we can rely upon a probable majority? Well, join me. Let's find out. Friends, we begin on Daf Yud Aleph, Amid Aleph, on the second line of Zedaf. How do we know the following thing that the rabbis said? Zilbas or Ruba, that we go based on the majority. Minolam, what do you mean? How do we know what are you talking? The rabbis say based upon the majority? The pasuk says go based on the majority. We learn Masechta Sanhedrin. Is it? I think it's, if I'm not mistaken, it's the first Mishnah of Masechta Sanhedrin already. I think that we go based on the majority. So what do you want to understand? What are you saying? The rabbi said goes to the majority. The pasuk says go based on the majority. Okay, the Gemara clarifies. Ruba de Isa Kamon. We're not talking about Ruba de Isa Kamon. We're not talking about when we can count ourselves. To go in Tesha Chanuyos, the famous example of the 9 butchers that are selling kosher meat and the one butcher that sells non-kosher meat, and you find a random piece of meat and you need to know, right, which one did it come from. We say called the parish, meruba parish. So we could do the cheshbon. You have 9 kosher, right? 9 are kosher, 1 is not. The majority rules. Called the parish, meruba parish goes based on the rov. The Sanhedrin, also the Sanhedrin, go based on the majority. For example, by Din and Nefashos, you have a Sanhedrin of 23 judges, 12 say innocent, 1 says guilty, 12 say innocent, 11 say guilty. There's more innocent than guilty, innocent. Lo kami barlan. We're not asking about that, because you're right. The pasuk says, Achir Rabim Lahatos, when we can Ruba de Isa Kamon, we can count them up. 9 and 1, 12 and 11. Of course, we'll go based on the majority. Kikami barlan. We want to know about probable majorities. Ruba de Lesa Kamon, a rove that isn't in front of us that we can count. Kigon, for example, Ko'in Viktana, Minolim. For example, Ko'in Viktana. Who can tell me what we're talking about? Ko'in Viktana? Yibum. When it comes to Yibum, the halacha is that Midoraisa, a Kohen and a Ketana can do Yibum. Midoraisa, Kohen and a Ketana, if both the brother and the widow are Ketanim, they could do Yibum. Now, you remember Masechta Yevamis? Long time ago already. The Chiddush by Yevamis is that normally somebody is not allowed to marry his brother's wife. It is a chiddush that we're saying, right? So the chiddush of Yibum is that in order, right, lahakim zera la'achiv, we say the mitzvah of Yibum comes and you can marry your brother's widow. Now, the thing is, with this Katan and Ketana, there is a chance that one or even both of them could turn out to be, the boy could end up being a saris, unable to have children. The girl can end up being in Ilonis, unable to have children. So there is a possibility that they will be literally, actually unable to have children, in which case there's no heter for somebody to marry his brother's widow. You're not allowed to marry your brother's wife. So, but we say the fact of the matter is, the probability is that he is not a saris and that she is not an Ilonis. And based on that probable majority, we say they can do Yibum. Now, I think we don't encourage minors to get married, but Midaraisa, a Kohen and a Ketana can do Yibum, even though there is a possibility that he could be a saris, she could be an Ilonis, but it's not probable. The probable majority tells us that they probably won't be a saris and Ilonis, and we say therefore they can technically do Yibum based on that probable majority, that they are neither an Ilonis nor a Saris. So how do we know this? How do we know that we go based on this probable majority? Amar Belazos. Now, basically for the whole daf now, we are going to have all sorts of suggestions. Initially, the suggestions are going to be rejected, and then they're going to start being accepted. Until at the very end, we're going to kind of have a sikum. Amar Belazos says, Belazos, Asime Reisha Shel Ola. Very interesting. Comes from the head of a korban Ola. The Pasuk says, V'nitach oisa l'nsachea, oisa l'nsachea, v'lo n'sachea l'nesachim. Now the Pasuk says that by korban Ola is entirely burnt on the Mizbeach. And you cut up the korban Ola into pieces. The legs, the different flanks, the breast, the head, all sorts of different, the korban is chopped up into all different parts. Now it says v'nitach osal l'nsacheh, you cut it up into its predefined parts, like I just mentioned, the different legs, heads, things like that. So osal l'nsacheh, you divide up the whole animal into its parts, v'lo nisacheh l'nesachim, but you don't further divide up its parts. Okay, so don't take the head and cut it in half. Okay, wait, but that's important, because how are you going to get to the brain? You see, the brain, if the membrane around the brain is punctured, I think specifically the thinner, so they're actually, we're going to be getting to all these things later on. I didn't make, this is a very bare bones daf. Thankfully it's not particularly difficult. Also, I didn't make slides because this is actually the second daf I am recording today. What time is it? It's almost 9 o'clock in the morning. It's the second daf I'm recording today. Once again, I'm attempting to get ahead by a day so that the dafs can come out on time again, early. Wish me luck. But hopefully I'll be, yeah. Chullin has been more manageable than Zvachim and Menachos. I'm hoping that we'll be able to keep it up this time. Anyways, so I didn't make elaborate slides for this daf. Also later, we're going to get to Elu Trefis. We'll get into all of this stuff. But around the brain, it's interesting. I'm using Hillel's book now it makes me a little wheezy still, but I think maybe I'll get a thicker skin over time. But yes, I'm looking at all these animal parts. But anyways, the brain has these two membranes around it. And so it's got a thinner membrane and a thicker membrane. I think if I remember correctly what I read, the thicker membrane could be punctured, I think, but the thinner one cannot. If I'm not mistaken, we'll learn all about that later on. Akopanim, so you cut off the head, you decapitate the animal, and the brain is in there. How do we know that the brain doesn't have some kind of hole in its membrane, which would make it a treifa? How are we going to check that? We can't. We just assume that the probability is that it's not a treifa. And therefore, we're just going to assume that and burn the animal on the mizbeach. Again, asimereshi the ola shall ola, it comes from the head of the korban ola. The Omar Kra, the pasuk says, "V'nitach oisa l'nsacheh," that you cut it up, the animal you cut up into its parts. Also l'nsachim, you cut up the full animal into its parts. V'lo n'sacheh l'nesachim, but not its parts further into parts of parts. V'nechu shema nikev krum shamayach. But don't we have to be concerned that maybe the membrane of the brain is punctured and that's a treifa, and that maybe the animal is treif? How can we just burn it? We have to look. Rather, no, we say go based on the probable majority, and the probability is that it is not a treifa, and we just run with that. Mimai, Frekti Gemara, this isn't exactly an amazing proof, because Dilma dipali le uvadakle. Maybe you split the skull, you don't completely break it in half, as we're going to see in a second, right? Because as we know, and as we're going to see in a second, if you break it in half, then that would be a violation of don't break its pieces further into more pieces. But if you kind of split it, but keep it connected at the bottom, kind of make like a V kind of thing, and you can just pry it open a bit without breaking it off in half, just pry it open a bit, and then you can inspect the brain. So v'mishum osan nesachea, and if you're going to say what, but you can't further break it down into the pieces into more pieces. V'lo nesachea nesachim, right? You break it into pieces. You can't break its pieces further into pieces. Hanimile heicha d'chotich le'legamer. Yeah, but that's only if you literally break it in half and separate them. Aval heicha de layif, but so long as they're still connected at the bottom, leislan ba nisht geferlich. So therefore, we say, it's not really a raya that will go based on the majority, because it could be that there are actually ways to check the membrane around the brain. Marbre de Ravina Omer, Marbre de Ravina suggests, Asu mishviras etzim bepaisich, the korban paisich, it says, ve'etzim lo sishbru bo. You can't break any bones. So now if we revisit the topic from a second ago, breaking the skull to inspect the brain, by the Korban Pesach that won't work, because you're not allowed to break the bones at all. Not just break it in half, you can't break it at all. So how are you going to inspect the brain? Rather, it must be that we go based on the probable majority. The Rachman of the Pasuk says, you can't break any bones of the Korban Pesach. But don't we have to be concerned that maybe the membrane around the brain is punctured? Elalav mishum damina zil basaruba. Rather, it must be that we go based on the probable majority, and probably it is not a treifa. Mimai, 1 second, how do we know? Dilma demanach gumrisa ole vikalile uvadikle. Maybe you take a hot coal, put it on the top of the skull, and it'll burn a hole through the skull, and then you can have a look-see at the membrane around the brain. Desanya is within the breast. Somebody who cuts through the sinews of the Korban Pesach, or burns any of the bones, there's no violation of breaking bones there. Cutting through sinews, burning through bones, you just can't break the bones. And therefore, there is technically a way to check the membrane around the brain without having to rely on the probable majority. We learn from the aliyah. When it comes to a sheep and a ram, the fatty tail is burnt on the mizbech as part of the emurim. The Rachman of the pasuk says, "Chelbo ha'aliyah tmima," that with the chelev of the sheep or ram, you also burn the complete aliyah, the complete fatty tail. It has to be whole, it has to be complete. Okay. The spinal cord. It's so funny, I'm talking about anatomy as if like I know actually what I'm talking about. I mean, I know what I looked up and learned 6 hours ago. And I could share that with you. So be'etzim, the spinal cord, goes from the brain through your like vertebrae, like your like spine. That's like all those like pieces and like bone pieces that like are like puzzle pieces, that your spine. And then through your spine, or in the case of this animal, let's say a sheep, so you have this spinal cord, which I think is like the basically cord that has all the like nerves and stuff in it. So that spinal cord exits your brain, exits the brain of the sheep, and then goes through the vertebrae, through the spine of the sheep, all the way through its tail. So it starts at the brain and goes through the spine and through the tail. Now, if at any part the spinal cord is severed, then it's treif. So that's a treifa. If at any point it's severed. Now here's the thing. Once you cut off so you already slaughtered the animal. The animal's slaughtered. Okay. All good, right? There's no severing the spinal cord after it's already been slaughtered, obviously, is fine. The question is, was the spinal cord severed before it was slaughtered? So you cut off the tail. Now the thing is, the spinal cord goes throughout the tail. How are you going to be able to check the spinal cord that's inside the tail to be able to see if maybe it was severed at some point in the tail? Because there's an aliyah tmima. The aliyah, the tail needs to be complete, it needs to be whole. You can't start cutting it open to start having a look at the spinal cord to see if it's severed anywhere. So rather, it must be, we just assume, we go based on the probability that it's probably intact. Again, I'm going to start this again. I'm going to read this again. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says, Aser me aliyah, that it comes from the aliyah, from the fatty tail. The Amar Achmana, the Torah says, Chel bo aliyah tmima, that with the sheep and ram, you burn the aliyah, the fatty tail, and it has to be whole, it has to be complete. You can't cut it up. But maybe the spinal cord is severed in the fatty tail, but we won't be able to know because we can't open it up to look. So rather, it must be that we say, well, let's go based on the probability that it is intact. But wait, maybe you'll say that you cut off the tail far enough down the spinal cord that it's at a place where it's okay for there to be severed. Because when it comes to the spinal cord, right, so we say that the spinal cord cannot be severed. And if it is severed, it's treif, right? However, there's more nuance. And that is, once you get to the end of the tail, what's called the bein ha-prashos, there's the prashos. Basically, so again, the spinal cord starts at the brain, and it goes through the vertebrae of the animal, and then it ends in the tail, right? It goes through the tail and it ends probably at the end of the tail or close to the end of the tail. Now, once the spinal cord starts getting to the end, like to the tail and stuff, what happens is kind of like a tree, the trunk and the body of the tree is really thick, but then once it starts branching off, the branches are thinner, and then it branches off and it gets thinner and thinner. So, right, so if you look at a branch, right, if you have like a long branch and it's branching off, by the time you get to the end of that branch and other branches that branched off of that, by the time you get to the end of that long branch, it's going to be very thin. So here also, the spinal cord, as it gets towards the end, it starts branching off to the left, to the right, straight, to the left, to the right, straight. And that straight spinal cord is getting thinner and thinner and thinner as you're having a branch to the right, branch to the left. It continues straight but thinner. Another branch to the right, another branch to the left, and it continues straight but thinner still. And then another branch to the right, branch to the left, continues straight and even thinner, etc. So once it starts, that's what's called bein ha-prashot, the area where it's like branching off and getting thinner. So if there's a sever in the spinal cord at that point, that's actually okay. So the Gemara is suggesting maybe you're cutting off the tail far enough down the spinal cord that even if there were to be a sever in the spinal cord in the tail, it wouldn't actually matter because it's bein ha-prashot. It's at the point where any sever in the spinal cord would be nonetheless kosher. Right, so again, if you're going to say, well, you're cutting off the tail far enough down that severs don't matter anymore. That, well, the pasuk says, the otza, the klayos, the kidneys that give advice. The kidneys. So basically you're cutting the tail from, I guess, the area of the animal of the kidneys, and that would be high enough up on the spinal cord that there would still be more spinal cord, that if that part of the spinal cord got severed, it would be an issue. So there will be parts of the spinal cord that are part of the aliyah that we do need to be concerned about severed, if it's severed. So again, what do? We're unable to inspect it. So Dilma, so we might, but still, why is this a riot? Maybe we can inspect it. Dilma de pasach le uvadik le. Maybe you are opening up the tail in order to inspect the spinal cord in the tail. Yeah, but didn't we say that it has to be whole? How can you open up the tail? You're cutting it open, it has to be whole. There's only an issue of it being incomplete if you literally cut it into pieces. But if you still leave it connected, sure, you open it up, sure, But as long as you're still keeping it in one piece, then that would be okay. So again, so far we've been unsuccessful. That's about to change. But so far we've been unsuccessful in trying to say that we go based on the probable majority, whether it was with the head of the Ola or with the Korban Pesach or with the Aliyah. We were trying to say, well, we got to just assume that it's kosher and that it's healthy and that it's not a treifa. But each time we said, no, there are ways of checking our assumption. I'm going to take a shluck of tea and then we're going to start getting some examples that are going to stick. Omer Rav Sheshes Brei Rav Idi Omer. Rav Sheshes Brei Rav Idi says, Asimi Egla Arufa. Okay, we're learning out from the Egla Arufa. Of course, right, we find a dead corpse. We don't know what happened over there, so the closest town brings a calf and we hack off its head. Tamar Rachman, the Pasuk says, Ha Arufa, the Arufa. That once it's been arufad, once its head has been hacked off, you leave it. You just push it, leave it. Kishi shlema teave ha arufa, the arufad egla, you arufa it and you leave it. Leave it, don't do anything to it. V'leichos dilma trefei, but maybe it's a treifa. Maybe it's a treifa. If we're just leaving it, how can we check to make sure? How can we check to see if it's a treifa or not? Rather, it must be that we say, go based on the probability that it's not a treifa, that it's healthy. And if we're going to say, who cares if it's like whoever said that an egla rufa needs to be a treifa? Like, take a calf, hack it, hack the back, hack it the back of its neck. Done. Who said anything about treifas? They say by the Besmensh of Rabbiana, kapora ksiv ba kikachim. It says kaper lamcha Yisrael, right? I believe that's what it says. So because it says kapara by inegla arufa, so it's like a korban, and korbans obviously cannot be treif. So also the egla arufa cannot be treif. So how are we going to know if it's treif or not if we can't check it? We just have to leave it. Well, we'll go based on the probable majority, and that seems to stick. Rabbi Rav Shila Omar says, Rabbi Rav Shila asa mi poche adume comes from the red heifer. The Rachman of the Pasuk says, v'shachad v'saraf. You slaughter the red heifer and you burn the red heifer. Ma shchita kishi shlema, av seifasa kishi shlema. Just like you slaughter it when it's whole, take the whole animal and slice its neck. So also the burning is also when it is whole. You take the whole animal and burn it. But wait, what if it's a treifa? We say go based on the majority, on the probable majority that it is healthy, that is not a treifa. And if you're going to say, well, who cares if the red heifer is a treifa or not? Whoever says that it needs to not be a treifa. Chatas kari rachmana, the pasuk calls it a chatas, right? Lemenida chatas he. It's called a chatas, and therefore, just like a chatas, it needs to be healthy. How do we know that it is in fact healthy if we can't check it? Well, we go based on the probable majority. Rav Acha bar Yankiv Omar says, Rav Acha bar Yaakov asim misara mishtaleach. On Yom Kippur, of course, there are the two goats. One is offered as a so'ir anaisa bifnim, the so'ir Yom Kippurim. The other is chucked off a cliff. You take the two goats. Skip the next few words. Now, what if the so'ir mishtaleach is a treifa? What if the so'ir mishtaleach is a treifa? The one they're going to chuck off a cliff is a treifa. Rather, it's because we say go based on the majority, and the probability is that it is not a treifa. And if you can say, well, who cares if it's a treifa or not? You're chucking it off the cliff. Who says it needs to be healthy? ela b'davar roi l'Hashem. That the animal, right? So you draw lots, right? Which one is going to be for the korban and which one is going to be chucked off the cliff. And again, ein gorel kovea, the lot is only kovea la'azazel, which one is going to be, right? The one that is going to be la'azazel, ela b'davar roi l'Hashem. The goat that ends up being chucked off the cliff is a goat that could have potentially been fit for being the Sarah and Isa Bifnim, right? We don't know what the lot is going to land on, and therefore both of them have to be potentially able to be offered as the Sarah and Isa Bifnim, and they have to be healthy. And how do we know that the Sarah HaMishtaleach is in fact healthy? Rather, we go based on the probability that it's healthy. And if you're going to say, well, after you chuck it off the cliff, you then rappel down the mountain and have a look-see, have a sneaky peek. Yeah, but the Mishnah says in Masechta Yoma that by the time it got halfway down the mountain, it was already broken into a million pieces, and therefore, you're not going to be able to check for treifas at that point. It's been too damaged. So we go based on the probable majority that the Sarah Lazozo was in fact healthy. Rav Mari Omer says, Rav Mari, Asumi Makya Avivimo. A fellow who hits his father or mother is chayav. I forget. Possibly skila. Either skila or I think chanek. I think skili. I don't remember. It's chayav misa. I should have looked it up. Do we say most you must? Most you must. Most you must, I think is maybe chenek. I think we say skila is what? When it says dam of bow or something, right? Either way, it's chayav misa. Or maybe it's right, chenek. Maybe it's saif. I don't know. What's the answer? I don't know. One of them. I always forget. Right, the one of them for this, right, you chayav means for cursing your parents and for hitting your parents. One of them is skila, one of them isn't. Okay, I'll have to look it up. From one who hits his father or mother, the pasuk says katle, that is chayav misa. The leichush dilma lav aviv hu, but how do you know that his father is in fact his father? The mother, it's easier to know because she gave birth to him, so you can kind of know that. But how do you know his father is in fact his father? He hits his father. He's chayav misa, so we're going to kill him for that. How do we know that it's in fact his father? Well, mishum tamin zilba saruba. Well, go based on the majority virov beilos acher habal, and most of the time, his mother would have been having bia with his father, and therefore, based on that, we are going to assume that he hit his father and that he's chayav misa. Mimai, wait, how do you know? Dilma kigon shayu avimo chavush beis asurim. Maybe we're only going to mete out capital punishment for this fellow in a scenario where his father and mother were locked up together in a jail cell and nobody else was coming in or out, and it was only them two. Maybe only when we can know for sure that he really did in fact come from his father, there was zero possibility that it could have been anybody else, maybe only then do we say it's chayav misa. But in general, maybe we could be concerned that it was from somebody else. So even so, there's no guardian, there's no guard when it comes to arayos. Anything can happen. Even when you're just locked, the two of you in a jail cell, the jailer could pull some shtick, whatever. Who knows what could happen when it comes to arayos? Anything could happen. And nonetheless, we are going to kill this young chap based on the probability that he is the child of his father, the person that he hit. Rav Kana Amar says, Rav Kana Asumi Horeg es anefesh. Right? A person, right? Reuven kills Shimon. So we kill Reuven. But how do you know maybe Shimon was a treifa? Dam Rachmana Kadle, we kill Reuven. V'lechush Dilma treifa. Maybe Shimon was a treifa. And if Shimon was a treifa, he basically killed a person who was already considered dead. So if you kill a dead person, you're not chayav misa for that. So, and yet we're going to kill Reuven based on the fact that Shimon was probably healthy. So we're going to go based on the probability that Shimon was healthy. And if you're going to say, well, we cut open Shimon and inspect him to see if he's a treifa. How come minavil? Well, that's not really covered a mace to start cutting open Shimon to see if he's a treifa. But maybe we'll say, okay, yeah, normally we're not going to want to cut open Shimon to see if he's a treifa, but if it means that Reuven could be spared the death penalty if Shimon turns out to be a treifa, because that means that Reuven didn't kill a live person, he's considered to have killed a dead person. So if we could spare Reuven's life, I think it's worth it to cut open Shimon to see if it's a treifa. Yeah, but even so, cutting him open isn't really going to help, because there's still the possibility of maybe where Reuven sliced off his head, maybe where Reuven sliced off Shimon's head, there was already like a hole in his throat or something there, maybe he was a treifa there, and cutting him open and doing an autopsy, so he won't find that anyways, because he may have sliced him where there was already a hole. Rather, we go based on the majority and assume that Shimon was healthy. Ravina Amar says, Ravina Asim Edim Zomimin. We learn it out from Edim Zomimin. If Shimon and Levi testify about Reuven, that Reuven is Chayiv Misa, and then Shimon and Levi become Edim Zomimin, turns out that they're a bunch of liars in a Zomimim kind of way. So instead of killing Reuven, we kill Shimon and Levi. V'dilma hach dasidube treifava. But wait, maybe Reuven is a treifa, and if Reuven is a treifa, so they weren't technically killing a live person; they were killing a dead person. So alad mishum dabin zobas aruba. Rather, must be we say go based on the majority, and chances are Reuven was healthy. And if you're going to say, well, if we're talking about a situation where Shimon and Levi testified about Reuven, that he's Chayiv Misa and they killed Reuven, so do an autopsy and see if Reuven was a treifa or not. However, by the time we learn about it, Bribi Omer. Bribi is like means like a great person, and Rashi points out we don't know which great person this was, but it was a great person. Lo hargo nerogin hargo ein nerogin, or hargu. That when it comes to Edim Zomnim, if Reuven was actually killed based on the testimony of Shimon and Levi, we actually don't kill. Right? Kasher Zomam, v'lo kasher osa. We do to Shimon and Levi what they attempted to do to Reuven, not what they actually accomplished doing to Reuven. And if Reuven was actually killed, then we would not be killing Shimon and Levi. We're killing Shimon and Levi when the verdict was, right, it was confirmed, the Reuven was found guilty based on the testimony of Shimon and Levi, but he was not yet killed, and then it turns out that Shimon and Levi were Edim Zomim. They were about to get away with causing Reuven to be killed. But in the last minute, they become Edim Zomim. Only in that case do we kill them for trying to kill Reuven. But since Reuven's alive, we can't actually check him to see if he's a treifa. So therefore, we just assume that he's not a treifa, and based on that assumption, we kill Shimon and Levi for trying to kill Reuven. Rashi says we can actually just learn it out from Shchita itself. The Amar Rachman, the pasuk says, "Shchot ve'echol." Slaughter an animal and you can eat it now. V'leichu shema b'makom nekev kashachit. But how do you know that maybe where the Shchita knife sliced through the neck, there was a hole in the esophagus or something, and it was a treifa? But you'll never know because the knife cut right through where the hole was. Rather, we say the probability is that if you didn't find any other reason to make it a treifa, you probably didn't slice through an existing hole. And we say it's kosher. Now Rav Ashi says, I said this before of Kana, that we go based on the probability that it's kosher, since that we can eat shchita, and we don't assume that maybe there was a hole there. No, we go based on the probability that it's kosher. Some say it was of Kana before Rav Shimi. And Rav Kana said to Rav Shimi, I guess Rav Shimi said to Rav Kana, but wait, but maybe heicha de efshir efshir, heicha de lo efshir lo efshir. But one second. Maybe we do what we can. Maybe we simply do what we can. So when it comes to shchita, look, we can't know if there was a hole there exactly in the place where you sefted. But nonetheless, we do everything that we can do if there's a way for us to find out, then we should do that. For example, when it comes to the katan and the ketana by yibum, maybe we shouldn't just assume that they are not a saris or ilonis respectively. Maybe we should wait in order to, right? Since we can wait, we should wait, maybe. And maybe I can argue that, for example, by shchita, the reason why we can eat the shchita is because we have no other way of knowing whether or not there was a hole there before. You sliced right through it potentially. So therefore, there's no way for us to find out, so we can go based on the majority there. But whenever there is a way, whatever we can do, perhaps whatever we can do in order to figure out if there's some kind of issue, then we should do that. Because if we don't say this, the meir the chayish lemiuta hachinami delo ochal bisra, right? Because according to Reb Meir, of course, his shita is that it's choshesh lemiuta, right? When it comes to yibum, for example, of the katan and katana, Reb Meir would say that they can't do yibum because there's of the possibility that there might be a saris or a ilonis. So now, if Reb Meir is choshesh lemiut, he's concerned about minority possibilities. Well, there is a possibility that when you shecht an animal, you're slicing through a pre-existing issue, right? Maybe in the neck, there was a hole in the esophagus and you sliced right through it and you'll never know because you sliced right through it. According to Rameir's Choshesh Lemiut, maybe, so that there is this possibility. It could be that this happened and we should have to be concerned about that. Elamai, rather. So what are you going to tell me that Rameir never eats meat because he's concerned about this possibility? Right? If you don't say like this, what? Like what? Like that you do the best you can. Whenever you can research something, so research it. If you can't research it, okay, malasot, what can you do? So when you shecht the animal, since there's no way of knowing, malasot. If you don't say Reb Meir is concerned about minority possibilities. What, does Reb Meir never eat meat because of the possibility that maybe where you slaughtered the animal there was a hole? If you're going to say, yeah, Reb Meir doesn't eat meat because he's concerned about the possibility. Pesach b'kotcha, what about Korban Pesach? What about Korban Shlomim? Right, by Korban Pesach it says v'achlu esabaso, you have to eat the meat. And by Korban Shlomim it says v'achlu osu meshakuba b'hem, that right, that you're going to eat the Korban. So now, if you have to be choshesh lemiut, that maybe it's treif and you just don't know because you sliced right through it. But then how are you going to eat Korban Pesach? How are you going to eat Shlomim? Rather, no, where it's possible to research and look into something, you do it. If it's impossible, it's impossible. And we'll go based on the majority then and assume that it is kosher. So Rav Shimi suggests that maybe we'll say the same thing, generally when it comes to majorities, that when there are majorities that we can check out, so we check them out. But if it's impossible to check out, then we don't check out. If it's impossible. Okay, so if that's the case, then when it comes, for example, to the Kohen and the Ketana, so shouldn't we suggest that they just wait until they're older and let's see if he turns out to be a Saris or if she turns out to be an Ilonis? So Rashi says that, well, he gives two possibilities. Either it's halacha Moshe Misinai, that we can go based on the probable majority even when it is possible to check it out. So when it comes to the Katan and the Ketana by Yibum, we say that they can do Yibum, even though, yes, we could wait a whole bunch of years and see if they turn out to be a Saris or an Ilonis. But we say, look, if the majority is not Sarises or Ilonises, we don't need to wait and check it out. We can go based on the probable majority. Alternatively, when it says Achri Rabim Lahatos, you could say that even applies not just to Ruba de Isa Kaman, but even Ruba de Lesa Kaman. And we could say, look, if the majority of people are not Sarises and are not Ilonises, Achri Rabim Lahatos tells us that we can go based on that probable majority and say that this Kohen and this Kitana can nonetheless do Yibum. Friends, on Daf Yud Aleph of Masechta Chullin, we were trying to answer the question of when there is a probable majority, for example, the Gemara gave an example of you have a katan and a katana that they're going to do yibum. According to the Chum, they can do yibum. Because chances are they won't be a saris, he won't be a saris, she won't be an ilonis. How do we know that we can go based on this probable majority? And we gave all sorts of suggestions. Some worked, some didn't work. In the end, we saw a possibility that, look, maybe when there's a possibility to look into things, we need to look into them. And when there's no possibility, such as maybe you sliced right through a hole in the esophagus. Okay, if there's no way to look into it, there's no way to look into it. But if you can look into it, maybe you do have to look into it. In the end, Rashi gave some suggestions that maybe it's just simply halacha Moshe Misina that we can go based on this probable majority, rather than saying that you have to wait until they get older. Alternatively, it could be that Achirabim Lahatos says that whether it's Ruba de Isa Kaman, like the Tesha Chanuyos or the Sanhedrin 12 verses 11, but also when Ruba de Lesa Kaman, such as an assumption that, from what we can tell, most boys are not sarises and most girls are not ilonises, we can rely upon the majority there as well. Friends, that was Daf Yud Alv Masechta Chulin. I hope you enjoyed it. Have a great day. Cheers.